welcome to Impactful Innovation with Commercis, the podcast series that lifts the lid on the ways in which technology lives alongside us all. I'm David McClelland, and so far in this series we've touched on how technology innovation is making good things happen around the world, and trust me, there'll be a lot more of that in the coming episodes. But in today's show, we have to acknowledge that not everybody with great digital power at their fingertips chooses to use it responsibly. Whether with political aims or for financial gain, bad actors are launching cyber attacks indiscriminately. So, how is this game of cyber cat and mouse playing out right now, and how might it evolve in the future? I'm joined today by expert guests down the line, including Floyd Turner, Chief Operating and Quality Assurance Officer at Commercis, who's joining me live from the UAE. Floyd, good to see you.
Hi, David. How you doing?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for joining us all the way from Dubai there. Tell me a bit about your role and where quality assurance fits into the cybersecurity picture we're painting here today.
Absolutely. I have two aspects, responsibilities that are extended out to. One is our global service operations, and that includes our customer experience, as well as then our in-life support, including our technical advanced center services, which we call our TAC. But that really includes that front-end interface with our customers and enterprise partners. People would probably call the help desk advanced support, as well as then it extends out into the NOC or Network Operations Center, including as well then the SOC or the Security Operations Center. So all encompassing of that with the interfaces and support. And our technical service operations really in focusing on keeping services available, uptime, and performance. And then as it goes into the quality management services, really support the business units. It includes our ISO certifications, policy standards, guidelines, all the guardrails necessary in the QMS and IMS systems. But also it includes the quality support services in our training, awareness, communications programs across Commercis as a whole. I guess in simple terms, you think about it, our teams are responsible for really keeping the global services operations up and running, consistent and continuity, meeting our service commitments and standards really in a 24/7 environment.
And that piece about quality standards and policies, you mentioned ISO and ISO 27000. There's so many different standards here that go hand in glove really with cybersecurity awareness, and cybersecurity as you engage with third parties as well. So it's easy to think of, it's policy, it's documentation, it's a tick box that people need to do every month, every year or so to ensure that they, are compliant with the policies. But it is so fundamental to ensuring that as an organization in your own right, but also as an organization that works with suppliers, you are as cyber robust, as cyber secure as you possibly can be.
Yeah, it really is. It's a full integration in the life cycle and in the environment. And so you can put all of the standards and compliance in place, but as well as, you venture into the cybersecurity arena. And you'll touch on, I think, a lot on not only, the usual of people, process, and technology, but then how it all is integrated. And then you throw AI into the mix, and it really just evolves a lot into, the world and that we play in today. It's you have no idea what it's going to look like in the future as well. So I think it's something that you have to build to absolutely in the quality assurance as well as in the day-to-day operations.
Yeah, people, processes, and technology. We're going to be touching on all of those in our conversation about cybersecurity today. But thank you for now. We'll come back in just a moment. For our Zoom Out interview today, we wanted to get a sense of the past and the present of cyber attacks and use that as a clue to their future. And who better to speak to than an actual hacker?
Hi, I'm Manit Sahib. I'm an offensive security expert, aka ethical hacker. My background is UK government and defense, and I'm the director of Cytadel Cyber, which specializes in red teaming and ransomware resilience.
What's the biggest change that you've observed in cyber attack and defense in, let's say, the last 5 years? And what do you think this tells us about what we might expect over the next 5 years?
in the last 5 years, you needed some serious technical skills to be able to craft attacks and compromise environments. What we've found in the last 12 months with AI now being present is this has lowered the barrier to entry for attackers to come in and compromise environments. So the skill level has changed. And this means that other organizations or, wider organizations now see the impact of getting their basics wrong. So the fundamental change we've seen is the lower barrier of skill required to now be malicious.
So you don't necessarily need that technical skill. You just need the motivation to go and attack someone to, for whatever reason. That's what you need. And the technology, leveraging AI, is there so that you can conduct those attacks.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, we would say that there are sophisticated things which, we do as professionals to come in and build resilience. But really the damaging part of what low skilled, high motivated people could do, like disruption attacks or, credential stealing, things like that cause disruption. They can come in and start conducting that because of the attack surface of an environment. And now AI can now aggregate this information and they're able to then weaponize it, whether it's, brute force scanning or whatever it may be. And we've seen now as well that AI has been weaponized for offensive attacks. So myself in particular, for the last 2 years, I've been weaponizing for deepfakes, for looking at impersonation. So how can I take someone's face, deepfake them, and then convince employees or external parties to do some type of action? So it's gone past the day of just doing your phishing for social engineering. We have deepfakes and we also have vishing. And if we look at some of the attacks we've seen in retail this year, the entry point was vishing, and you don't need a lot of skill to be able to do that. You just need, maybe it's a bot that you've trained with AI, maybe it's personal skills that you need. But yes, that's the biggest change we've seen in the last 5 years. More attackers being able to come in and cause disruption.
So in terms of what this means for the next 5 years, then we know how generative AI is being used to generate synthetic or, mimicking existing humans to socially engineer their way into organizations and past help desks and so on. We know this. So what are vendors doing to try and counter that, to try and detect when something that looks real, actually, we know that it isn't real?
Yeah, it's really difficult for vendors at the moment. I think we can break this down. So I normally look at people, process, and technology. From the technology side, you can see alerts going off in the environment, and they're going to start using AI to be able to battle AI. So it's going to be the battle of AIs, and it's not cat and mouse anymore. It's cat versus AI powered swarm of mice, as you would say. And then you've still got this cat and mouse game. But I think fundamentally, as defenders, they need to catch up, because things like deepfake, we don't currently have any technology that I know of that can detect a deepfake. Right. So in the next 5 years, we're going to start seeing more defensive solutions come out, but then we may see the likes of quantum. And, when you're looking at quantum and encryption and potentially breaking encryption and then putting AI to be able to now give it a supercharge and doing it autonomously, that really comes to light around, what the risk could be.
Yeah, so just to expand on that quantum thing, the risk there is that a lot of our data, either at rest, stored on storage devices, or in flight being transmitted from A to B, it's encrypted with algorithms that aren't impossible to crack. It's just really, really hard. And using the compute that we have available to us right now, it takes a long time. So effectively, it's unbreakable encryption. But the challenge, as you point out there, is that with quantum compute, potentially it will be able to break that encryption, to undo that encryption, meaning that all the current ways that we at the moment do our online banking, or we trust that the personal stuff that is stored on, whether it's banks or social networks or wherever else, that could potentially be decrypted. And that is incredibly worrying.
And it's such a good point, because I think that shows us that in the future, this technology is going to bring up weaknesses that we have today. One clear example of that is Copilot, right? So a lot of organizations are now using Copilot for their internal, be able to gather information internally. Because they have not tagged or classified data properly in the environment, anyone with access to a Copilot license can now search for every bit of information. And now it's bringing up insider risk or access to files which people shouldn't have. And because of AI, it's not AI's fault, but it's because the organization has not classified the information. We're now seeing this risk. And I think with quantum and going forward, that's what we're going to start seeing is it's going to highlight a lot of the issues that we have now and saying, what could we have done differently to make it secure for the future?
So looking at where we are right now, as an offensive security expert, what's the biggest attack vector that you're seeing active at the moment? And I guess biggest by damage caused or money lost or generated for hackers?
Yeah, it's number one is ransomware. I see it. I mean, I'm an offensive security expert. I specialize in a red teaming, which is covert operations. And one of the biggest asks I get from my clients is, how do we test our ransomware resilience? Which is why we specialize it, because there is a high demand and we see it in the market. We've seen a lot of the UK retail and across the globe, right, be attacked by ransomware actors. And this for us is the most damaging because they come in and they encrypt the data or they threaten to leak the data. So you don't just have the risk of business disruption, you now have reputational damage. You have potentials that they will report you to, some regulator. So you have a regulatory fine. So now you've gone from extortion to double extortion, triple extortion, and the money keeps going up. And, from what I'm aware, cyber insurance, goes up to like 81 or around 80 million. Now, for an attacker who knows this, they're like, great, every client I get, if they have the good data, I'm going to take 80 million out of it. So for them, it's a good way of making money. And for us, as professionals and defending against these attacks, these are the things that we see disrupt business operations. To give you an example, right? My background is government. We dealt with nation state threats. Now, if a nation state was to come into your environment, you wouldn't know. They wouldn't disrupt your services. They wouldn't do anything. I'm not saying that they're in there. I'm just saying their motives are very different. With the ransomware gangs, the reason why it's most disrupting and they get the most money is they come in and they bring everything to a halt.
So who's behind it then? I mean, you mentioned nation states there, and different threat actors have different motivations. Some might be looking for IP, looking to steal secrets. Others, like you say, clearly financially motivated. But who are the actual people behind the ransomware attacks specifically? What do we know about them?
Yeah, you take it with a pinch of salt. So we've created an economy right now in cybersecurity with the professional world that it's so difficult for someone who wants to learn cyber to get a job and make money, because the barrier is high. They want, employers want credentials, certifications. And importantly, what I find, and, I've been being as a hiring manager as well, we look at experience. And a lot of companies, they look at the experience of the individual. For someone coming into the field, they don't have the experience. They're in their catch-22. So they can't get the job to get the experience and they can't make money. So we've created this kind of dark side where they can then go on the internet or the dark web and get paid 100,000 for a week's worth of work. Now, if you're a 19-year-old, I mean, that's a way to make money for them. Why do you want to come into an industry, earn 35 grand, even if you get to the point of getting that job?
Yeah.
The dark side is offering much more. And this is what we're seeing. So a lot of the ransomware attacks that are happening, they're children, they're kids or teens, right? They're not children, but they're teens. And you look into the backgrounds and you start to analyze, well, they were interested in cyber and they wanted to do things and, just play around. And this was a bit of a game for them. And yeah, I think it's sad because, we accept in the industry, there is a skill shortage, but we don't offer the opportunity for people to be able to get that step into cyber.
Cyber attack and cyber defense is often characterized as cat and mouse. You mentioned it a moment ago, or this game of whack-a-mole. In your view, looking forward, will cyber attack always be one step ahead of cyber defense? Or are there ways that as cyber defenders, we can take action to fight back more smartly against cyber attackers?
Yeah, it's a good question. Let's put it into perspective of this. Like I'm an ethical hacker. It's way easier for me to find one way into an environment than for the defensive team to block all the doors. So it's always going to be easier for the attacker to get in, and it's always going to be harder for the defenders to defend. Now, with AI, and we talked about AI cats and AI swarm of mices. Now, it's going to be AI versus AI. As I use AI for my offensive operations, I'm seeing, defensive tools start to bring in AI technology into their tooling. So we are going to see, this AI versus AI battle with the defenders. But fundamentally, offensive security experts offensive security will always remain ahead, because there's people like myself who are intrigued in breaking things. And then we go and we find that one way in, and it's very hard for security tooling to be able to prevent against that.
So Manit, really it's a race then, isn't it? If there's always going to be that one way in, then it's a race between you as the ethical hacker, the red teamer, whether you find that vulnerability first or whether it's a bad actor who's going to find it first. That race is always going to be there.
Yeah, exactly. And I normally predict like 6 months down the line, we have leeway. So I'm trying to prepare environments to these attacks before they're actually weaponized by attackers. And yeah, for us, the way to treat like ethical hackers, and if you've watched Rocky, we're essentially Rocky Balboa's trainer. We're not the fight, right? We come in the ring and help the defensive teams. We have the sparring. We say, have you tested your mean time to detect, your mean time to respond? Are you good? Can you get back up? There's always this kind of blue team, red team analogy, but really we're aligned with the blue team, the defenders. What we are trying to combat is the bad guys. We're trying to get there before they do, so we can help our environments.
We'll have to leave it there for now, but Manit, Sahib, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, David.
Enlightening stuff. Thanks again to Manit. And despite all of the obvious technology angles to cybersecurity, our Zoom in conversation today focuses on what's often referred to as the human firewall. As computer systems get hardened and technical vulnerabilities get reduced, criminals are realizing that it can be easier and more effective for them to hack the humans than to hack the computers.
Dave Davis, I'm Senior Technical Director at ST Engineering iDirect. As an organization, we connect people where they haven't got a cable. So it's over satellite communications. It could be in the middle of the desert, Antarctic, on a plane, on a ship. And my specific role within that is I look after the defense technology for everything pretty much outside of the US.
What can you tell me about how cyber criminals have evolved their attacks to the point where it's the humans who are as likely to be targeted as it is the hardware or the software?
And I think that it started off years ago where there were technical vulnerabilities that were well known. The patches, the fixes for those then took a long time to solve and to sort out. And over time, that both detection and the correction of those holes, those gaps, those back doors has become much faster. And the technology is really getting to a point where it's got a level of security which is constantly being updated, and the vulnerabilities are constantly being checked and closed, which has then led to very much more that sort of like the soft side, the human element being exploited, because quite often as the technology gets more complex and secure, you find that the human being is going to be that weak point. And a typical example is if you have a password that is enforced to be 16 characters long, it has to have a symbol, a number, a capital letter. People will write it down. It's human nature. So you very much got this escalating scale where the technology becomes more secure, but then that puts more pressure on the human being. And because we always, human nature is we'll do things the easiest way possible, that's where the weak point becomes.
We talk a lot in technology, don't we, about people, process, and technology. And the history you gave us there, it talks a lot about the technology being hardened to cyber attacks. So it's natural that criminals would go after the people that you spoke about and the kind of rise in social engineering, but also the processes as well. And typically in enterprise, in business, the processes are the joins, the connections between one department or another, or one company and another. Talk to me about how we've seen a rise in supply chain, in attackers, in order to target their ultimate targets, kind of going one step away, looking at different members of the supply chain in order to get to their ultimate target.
Yeah, so there's two ways of looking at that. The first one is that actually no one stands alone as an island. There's always companies that rely on other companies. So, and now we're more connected as well. So you will have business systems that are interoperable and interconnected with other people's business systems. You've got billing, you've got sort of customer service. And the more you get that connectivity, it improves the service, but also it then increases that threat vector surface as well. So if your third parties are a weak point, then someone can get into them. Through that, they can then get to you. And that is, and we've seen it a couple of times with some of the recent attacks where a third party customer service, for instance, has been the vector to get into an organization. But also it's that part of that supply chain is there's that, again, that human element where the attackers are looking at the vulnerabilities of, we don't want to look silly. We don't want to upset our bosses. So there's an increase of like WhatsApp messages, text messages coming from someone purporting to be your CEO or your operations officer, who is then inviting you to click a link in order to allow them access to something or to approve something on their behalf. And it's becoming much more clever in the way it's being done, to the point the people who really know what they're doing are actually deliberately denying someone access to something when they should have a legitimate means. So it's really having that sort of like that joint in the global supply chain. It's having the control and access to security. But I think increasingly what's happening is you're almost expecting those vulnerabilities to eventually get through, which means you then have to then prepare on how resilient are you and how quickly do you bounce back. And that is becoming more and more key, because almost now it's not a case of if, it's almost certainly a case of when, and it's being prepared for that when, and making sure that it's as minimal as it can be as far as impact, and B, you can recover from it as quickly as possible.
Machines are generally predictable and programmable. Humans altogether less so. Criminals know this, and they also know how to exploit that fact as well. However, there is a strong argument that blaming humans, naming us, frankly, as the weakest link can ultimately be unhelpful in addressing the problem. So what's your take on this, Dave? And what can best practice look like? How do we get from humans being the weak link to humans being that human firewall?
And I think part of it is that practice and getting used to identifying what a threat is at the earliest possible opportunity. Looking at sort of democratizing that security so that it is everybody's role to look out for that phishing email, or everybody's role to sort of like to be willing to stand up and say, yeah, I think this is a problem. And they can say having that no blame culture where people can learn lessons and sort of like understand what went wrong and then how they can improve it for the future. But doing that in a safe, practical environment, I think, is key. And I've seen some great examples how it has been done at some recent conferences where the IT security team carried out a real ransomware internally, and denied their own systems, and took those systems down for a considerable period of time, without even the C-suite knowing that that was happening. A couple of the key people knew that there was going to be an attack, like exercise, but they didn't know when it was going to be. And what happened as a result of that, it's a brilliant case study, is they actually started off in the sort of like the Asia Pacific region, and then started moving west. So they took off the whole, I think it's the Japanese network. Uh-huh. They took the whole thing down. And what they found is that no one reported it. No one raised any concerns about it. And so that introduces this cultural element of different nations will respond in different ways. Some nations are very much more open. Others are very much more, they don't want to be seen to have made a mistake. So it's having an awareness of that as well. And in this specific attack, it rolled all the way through into Europe. Until eventually it got to the point of the guy said, look, okay, let's call this now. Someone's reported it officially. We can now sort of like bring the network back up again. And what they found is when they did that, they actually had downtime of around about 6 hours. Now that takes an IT security team to have a lot of support, but also that understanding of like training people in a real environment will probably prevent a real attack happening, or will mitigate it better in the future. And what happened in that specific instance is they learned the lessons. They sort of like, they brought out new policies. They educated everybody. They explained why it carried on as long as it did, that the processes weren't followed. It wasn't reported as quickly as it could have been. And because they didn't want to wake people up at a certain time in the morning, all of that sort of thing. And when they then did it again a year or so later, that downtime went from over 6 hours to 11 minutes from the instant that it started for it being reported and then being shut down. So they learned that lesson in a safe environment. And I think that's the key thing. It's that safe environment of that no blame culture. And we've seen it. There was one recently with a haulage firm that I think they've been in business for nearly 200 years and went bankrupt as a result of a ransomware attack. And that was down to an end user not using a safe password. The password was guessed, and they managed to get in and then work from the inside. And quite often, when an attacker gets access to a network, that's just the first point. They won't normally do anything for a long period of time. They'll sit, they'll monitor, they'll look at behaviors, they'll gather data. And that makes it much more difficult for you then to, when you do discover someone's inside the network, it makes it much more difficult to then react against that. So it's not necessarily that initial breach, it's how long that goes through, how much information is being stored and processed elsewhere.
And one thing that really stands out through that is that it's easy to think of security as being, oh, well, that's the security team's problem. That's the security team's mission. Whereas really it's everybody's mission. And coming back to that much challenged thing of humans being the weak link, and you are only as strong as the weakest link in your organization, there is an element of truth of that. And the fact is that you don't have to work in IT, you don't have to work in security to be, or even be on the C-suite to be targeted here. Criminals will often go for whatever the easiest access point that they can find is, and they will make the most of that wherever you work in an organization. So security is really everybody's responsibility, and good cybersecurity awareness training throughout the organization, no matter what your role, is absolutely essential to try and keep that watermark as high as it possibly can be. But of course, it's humans being supported by technology as well, though. It's not as though, we mentioned that technology through hardening, through Patch Tuesdays, whatever it is, the technology is more and more difficult to breach itself, and that humans are being the focus. But surely it's a case of humans and technology working together to try and create as secure an environment as possible, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it has to, you have to involve everybody from the CEO down, but also you have to give everybody the right tools. And the good thing is that on the security, the tools are getting easier to use. They're automated much more often than not. But also, people are being used to using them and being encouraged to report issues where they think there is a problem. And having that awareness across the board, I think it helps everybody. So you really do need to have that partnership of both human and technical element together. Automate where necessary and make it as easy as possible where you can, because the easier it is, the more likely people are to do it. And I think sometimes now, again, we're seeing the multi-factor authentication, all of that sort of good stuff. People are getting more and more frustrated by it. They'll try and find backward doors around it. They'll try and sort of like leave their PC on overnight because they don't want to have to log back in the morning. So you have to set your timeouts and all that sort of good stuff as well. So, and I think it's that understanding that people will take the easy route and making it as easy as possible, but also like making sure that they do keep up to date. And I think just having the knowledge of the type of attacks and having a no-blame lessons learned, if there is an attack, I think can really help. And that needs to be shared across the whole organization, not just the sort of like the IT and security department.
Dave Davis, thank you so much for chatting us through this.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks again, Dave Davis. Floyd, you've been listening into those conversations. What did you take away from them?
I think, hearing from the technical experts there, as well as the human side expert, kind of paints a full picture of and how we explore how we bring it all together. And I think, as we mentioned before, that people, process, and technology, they really tied it together as to what we're dealing with. And it's not just a system, it's a culture into what has to be put together. And it is, how you pull that together, how you deal with it, and then consider what's right for the environment. And that's really what excites me about this conversation. I think pulling it all together from the technical aspect, the human aspect, and then the operational dimensions that really need to be put in place.
It's one of those things, and coming back to your role as we discussed it right at the top of this show, it's easy to talk about this stuff, but unless you're actually doing it, unless the stuff is enforced or encouraged and you're not engaging the workforce, let's say, when it comes to cybersecurity awareness training, then each one of those little lapses creates a nook, creates a cranny, creates a crack that enables a bad actor to get in, to inject their malware, ransomware, whatever it is. And that's when the bad stuff really starts happening. So it's about being on that front foot and talking the talk, not just walking the walk, not just talking it.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's also what Dave talked about. You can put the practices and the playbooks and everything in place, but if you don't have that awareness and have an environment where people are also part of that front line, when something happens, you've got to create the awareness to take action and immediately. And so the example of not just of what you have in place and the technology can provide it, but part of what we look at from the quality assurance as well is that creating that awareness, the communication, making sure that people know what's coming and how this evolves. And so we put a lot of investment into that focus and something that, again, Dave mentioned that really has to be built into the environment. And as we said, part of the DNA of how you operate, making people aware, how you address it, how quickly you can address it. And I don't think it's really a matter of, the days have passed where you're working to like denial of attacks and really stopping things. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of how much you can mitigate, how quickly you recover, and really getting people on the front end. Obviously, technology helps in the approach, how quickly you can do it. But I think what Dave talked about, is really important in that aspect. And we have to create the awareness and the training so that the people are also part of that frontline firewall as well.
Yeah, and you hear vendors talk about this a lot. It's that assume breach mentality. It's the realization that it's not if, it's when, and that it probably already has happened. You just don't necessarily know about it yet. So having an instant response plan, having all of the stuff ready so that you can recover and respond appropriately, because it is going to happen at some point. Of course, technology isn't an island. We've said this before, and it's when you start layering technologies on top of one another, that's when interesting good and interesting bad stuff starts to happen. AI, I'm going to mention that, and we spoke about that in a number of times in the conversations. It's when you start layering AI with cybersecurity, that's when things get really exciting or really quite scary, depending on how you look at it, isn't it?
Yeah, it does. And, actually introduce new layers into this. And when you put AI on top of AI and their normal processes, and again, I'll use the example, and Manit talked a little bit about it as well, into some of the technology and approach and how you can address some of these. But I think when, I'll give an example, you spend a lot of effort in working towards operational excellence, automating workflows. You've got AI now that are for agent bots and interactions, automating that front end interfaces. But really what you also add is a layer of technology into that also needs a new consideration of protection and approach. I'll give you an example. We in our consulting services and what we deal with, even from our security operations center, you now have new aspects into this. And so as companies even deploy AI in those interfaces, you also then are introducing new ways and mechanisms for those bad actors to actually utilize and manipulate. One company we've talked to in an example, they have an interesting case study in this that it got a AI in the front end of interacting with customers on a tax solution. And so, automating to how do I do it? How do I approach it? But the interesting thing is they actually then manipulated the AI agent to find out how to beat the system, how to actually work around opportunities. And
that's what
and
the
so
bad
there was
actors were doing, that they were manipulating
Exactly.
that chatbot. Okay, wow.
Exactly, yeah. So finding out ways to beat it. Now, again, the development aspects and your typical software, your rollout, your testing, the software works, everything's in place, it answers the questions, but you really now have another layer into this and approach. And so now what Encrypt AI has done is built, and as it was talked about, kind of that red teaming approach, but now you've got this AI needing a red teaming approach into the AI interactions and deployment so that you can go through the scenarios, make sure everything is done from that aspect. But it's really a AI against AI into that effort. And so it does introduce a new perspective, another layer onto this. And again, this evolving world of technology. But still how you apply it back into now those interactions, the processes and the technology and the platforms that you're really putting in place, but it expands it into another area.
Yeah, and we're used to humans being in the loop so much throughout history. It's been humans sat at a keyboard or running a mouse or touching a screen. But as we move into a world of agentic AI, where agents are understanding a situation, making decisions, executing actions without the humans in the loop, that's one thing that's difficult to get our heads around. But then when it starts to become agentic AI, cyber attack, and cyber defense, it kind of blows that people, processes, and technology three-legged stool wide open there. Clearly, there's a lot of expertise required to keep up with what is a rapidly evolving picture when it comes to cybersecurity. And for organizations, whether you're a governmental organization or whether you're a commercial entity, keeping on top of this stuff, it's a real challenge, particularly if you aren't a technology-centric company yourself. So there's a real choice, a real set of decisions to be made, is there not, Floyd, as to whether you choose to bring this capability in-house and to try and fight the bad actors yourselves, or whether you choose to partner, whether you choose to outsource your cybersecurity operations to people who specialize in this area and are, maybe have more resource to keep on the front foot against them.
Yeah, exactly. Now you bring up a good point, David. I think, in this, and you have to look at the aspect of where you're at, either as a business, the type of services, the size, where you're at in the maturity of dealing with this. But it's also important, again, look at your core expertise. But in this area, you really want to look at relying on those partners in this evolving technology. And so as you look at this, I'll refer to it as almost a buy, operate, and then build it kind of model. And so that buy is really looking at then what's available that is fit for purpose, that would bring into your environment in those protections, that technology and those solutions. And so when you bring it into, the core protection in cybersecurity or even in AI, but a lot of these now are, again, not only available to you as solutions, but they need to be then tied in fit for purpose and evolving. And for many companies, that's not a core expertise that's readily available. And so you really want to rely on some of those partners that can provide this. And so that's kind of that buy model. And then it may evolve into you bring it in-house, you can operate that. Now, it doesn't mean everything. You may find key aspects into this. And so as you have in similar to our technical assistance centers, a service operations center may look at from the monitoring to the reaction or even deployment of technology and services. But that's something that, again, needs to be fit for purpose for each one. And then, evolving completely into a build. If you got the in-house expertise or your large enterprise development, it may be specific needs that you have that you want to bring in-house and continue to evolve. So it is a evolving continuum that really needs to be considered. But that buy, operate, build is kind of a good approach into thinking about how do I go about this. You don't need to boil the ocean immediately yourself, but you really need to look at what would be fit for purpose into your environment and for your business needs.
Now, Floyd, something that we're not going to touch too heavily on today, but is the whole concept of trust and third parties. And of course, when you are trusting a third party with your internal security, whether you're partnering or whether it's an outsourcing arrangement, you need to make sure that you are able to trust that third party to help you secure your organization and that they're not conversely going to introduce more risk into your operation.
I guess that's one of the things that we really work to focus on is to be that trusted partner. I think it's important in all aspects you're looking at. You need to have that confidence and that reliability in that partnership of what's being provided. And so I think part of our solutions and our approach in all aspects, and especially when we're looking at what's going to be best for our clients and even their customers as they're protecting and building all of the technology, process, people, overall solutions. And so that's one of the things that we really work to in that process is maybe down that continuum, provide not only the solutions, but be that trusted partner to help recommend what's the right approach, how do they use it, how do they integrate it, and then how do they bring that into that continuum and life cycle around that. So it's a really key aspect of what we work to bring to the table.
In so many ways, that word trust that you mentioned there, it's kind of fundamental to everything here, all the way from the technical stuff and zero trust, all the way through to our third-party relationships and the extent in which we feel able to trust who it is we're doing business with. Floyd, we'll have to leave it there for now, but thank you very much for joining us today.
Absolutely, David. Thank you so much.
For our next episode, we're not entirely leaving cybersecurity behind, but we are mixing it in with another high-profile ingredient, as we spoke about today, artificial intelligence. What happens when the world's first cognitive city starts getting attacked by AI-powered hackers? The answer? AI-powered cognitive cyber defense. We'll be looking at the double-edged sword of AI in episode 6 of Impactful Innovation with Commercis. Hope you can join us. But for now, bye-bye.